Right now, something has locked onto us. Not drifting by chance, not caught in a random curve of gravity. It reoriented itself with intent and pointed straight at our world. 72 hours after we last transmitted, an object designated 3IATLAS executed a maneuver that should have been impossible. In control rooms around the globe, technicians stopped mid-keystroke, coffee cups were left half full, and monitors filled with the same impossible numbers. The object changed course toward Earth with a precision that looked like a deliberate answer to our signal. That timing is not coincidence. That timing is response. We have cataloged the sky for centuries. We know the rhythms of natural motion. Comets tumble with ragged light. Asteroids rotate and tumble in ways that tell the story of billions of years. They show scars, chaotic brightness patterns, the fingerprints of random collision. 3I Atlas gave us none of that. Its light curve was clinical, exact. A rotation period measured to the thousandth of an hour, constant like a clock. Instruments at Palomar, at Arecibo during its last years, at the radio dishes scattered across the southern hemisphere, all reported the same anomaly. The brightness did not flicker. It breathed in a steady mechanical cadence. When spectral data arrived, the language was clearer and more terrifying. The surface read like an engineer's blueprint. Metal alloys arranged in unnatural ratios. Rare isotopes that should not form in the space between stars. Reflectivity so uniform, it suggested active maintenance. A material scientist at JPL said it plainly. This is manufactured. Manufactured recently. Then came the emissions. Space objects are quiet. They reflect sunlight and sleep. 3I Atlas hummed. Radio arrays recorded patterns that were not noise. Prime sequences, binary blocks, mathematical progressions repeated and varied in ways that implied intelligence. For months, teams engaged in a slow dance of code. We sent counting sequences, simple primes, images encoded as radio pulses, a basic attempt at a shared vocabulary. Responses came back as tiny phase shifts and frequency nudges, as if something were learning our accent. On September 15th, something changed. The Atacama Array registered a burst so dense it took multiple supercomputers to parse. Out of the burst emerged a three-dimensional stellar map, rendered in pure mathematics. Not a crude sketch, but a time-layered map showing star positions as they would have appeared tens of thousands of years ago. Embedded in that map was a target set. One entry was annotated with a symbol our translation models rendered most closely as objective. Earth was not only located, it was described. Every major artificial satellite, every deep space probe, every beacon we had ever placed into orbit was plotted with uncanny accuracy. Someone had cataloged our technology. At that moment, quiet emergency protocols activated across agencies. Missions were delayed. Probes were recalled. Classified facilities went from skeleton crews to full operations. Within 72 hours, the global space community was no longer just watching. They were planning, preparing, and in many places, hiding. Then the maneuvers began. At 1423 UTC on September 18th, radio telescopes recorded plasma discharges across 3I Atlas in patterns that looked less like weather and more like engine cycles. The energy density was off the charts. For 2 hours and 17 minutes, the object emitted pulses of power, timed with mathematical precision. Each burst lasted 1.3 seconds, followed by 4.7 seconds of silence. The pattern repeated as if someone had consulted a metronome. When the emissions ceased, the tracking arrays reported a change of attitude and trajectory so precise it violated basic conservation expectations. The object had altered its vector by over 23 degrees, in a short interval without expelling detectable reaction mass. No exhaust, no waste heat, nothing that matched any known propulsion principle. Propulsion engineers used to chemical burns and ion streams could not reconcile the math. The object had apparently moved by manipulating the fabric of space itself, creating effective flow in the direction it wanted to travel. New trajectory models placed 3IATLAS on an intercept with the plane of Earth's orbit. The projected closest approach, calculated to the minute, was Halloween night at 23:17 UTC. The precision of that prediction made clear this was not a chance close pass. It was a scheduled observation window. Public statements remained calm, full of measured scientific curiosity. Privately, national security organizations moved assets, shifted satellites to alternate trajectories, and activated deep shelters that had been quiet for decades. Quiet went to full. Deep underground facilities in multiple countries ramped up power, staffed life support, and opened communication channels rarely tested in public. Sources with access said files existed from decades prior, reports of objects that behaved like intelligence, logs dismissed by some as sensor glitches. A handful of analysts never stopped watching. The more we looked, the stranger it became. Observatories found that 3IATLAS was not alone. Smaller objects began appearing in predictable patterns, each different in form and function, but matching the same impossible propulsion signature. One object, spotted near Jupiter, showed crystalline structures that should not hold together in vacuum. Another near Saturn revealed surfaces that shifted like living tissue. A third moved with thermodynamic silence, as if partially outside the rules that govern energy and motion in our universe. These escort objects kept perfect formation spacing, arranged in a geometry that military analysts recognized from naval doctrine. 4.7 million kilometers separated them in patterns that suggested escort and protection. Call it escort, call it cordon. The implication was the same. Someone was assembling a fleet. Worse, the objects communicated among themselves. Radio arrays intercepted data exchanges richer and more complex than anything we had ever heard. These transmissions adapted. Frequencies shifted after televised news events. Formation geometry adjusted after military exercises, and the survey behavior intensified over regions with heavy infrastructure. They were studying us in real time and refining their approach based on the intelligence they gathered. The escorts were not homogeneous. Spectroscopy showed hulls composed of elements absent from our periodic charts. Energy signatures suggested propulsion principles that treated distance and time as variables to be negotiated rather than constants to be respected. On multiple occasions, craft disappeared from observational arrays, only to reappear in different sectors minutes later. One vessel vanished behind Venus and reappeared in lunar orbit 3 minutes after it had been observed. It had crossed millions of kilometers in a span of time that made physicists reach for new models. It did not travel through space the way we understand travel. It bent, folded, or sidestepped reality. That observation led to a new, darker hypothesis. This was not a single species arriving in a single way. The fleet displayed coherent coordination among craft that followed completely different engineering philosophies. Some used crystalline frameworks, others living metal, others a silence that suggested partial detachment from our domain. The simplest explanation was a coalition, multiple civilizations cooperating on a common objective. If true, the scale of logistics was staggering. These groups had synchronized arrival windows across interstellar distances in a way that implied either communications beyond light travel or planning that occurred long before our species rose from shelters to build cities. Archaeologists began to reassess ancient sites with a new lens. Alignments in stone circles, motifs in cave painting clusters, and myths from disconnected cultures suddenly seemed less like poetic coincidence and more like data points in a planetary file. Meanwhile, the countdown tightened. Tracking models refined the approach. October drew closer, and the data poured in. Radar imaging suggested massive, continuous surfaces, hulls formed as if grown in a single process, surfaces without seams or hatches. Propulsion left no exhaust. Thermal output was negligible compared to the forces being generated. The energy efficiency observed suggested engineering on a scale that rendered our chemical and nuclear propulsion trivial. Policymakers debated options that were never meant to be debated in public. Militaries ran simulations and discovered their conventional arsenals failed to produce meaningful effects in modeled engagements. Economists calculated the impact of disrupted communication in a world dependent on satellite networks. Civil defense agencies considered evacuation logistics at a scale never exercised. Quietly, some governments enacted emergency continuity plans that would reroute leadership and critical infrastructure to hardened facilities offshore and underground. But the most unsettling discovery was simple and direct. The fleet treated Earth as a known commodity. Their map of the solar neighborhood contained our orbital details, our communications traffic, and our deployment of weapons, all recorded and annotated. Earth had been observed in depth. We had not been selected at random. We had been observed, studied, and allocated a place in someone else's strategic calculus. There are two ways to interpret that fact. One reads as grimly hopeful. Perhaps we had passed some threshold and were being offered a seat at a wider table. Perhaps the timing, the math, the star maps were a form of deliberate introduction, a hard first lecture in galactic diplomacy, meant to test our readiness. The other way reads as unmistakably ominous. If they cataloged our weapons and knew our limits, they also knew how to neutralize them. We launched chemical rockets. They manipulated space. We split atoms. They engineered star-like processes. The next 42 days will answer which interpretation is closest to the truth. Scientists are racing to replicate the exotic isotopes, to model the apparent space-time manipulations, to build a language that can carry nuance rather than numbers. Diplomatic channels attempt to coordinate a global message. Militaries prepare contingencies that may never be used. Citizens around the world go about their lives with a quiet unease. Children keep asking their parents strange questions about the night sky and whether monsters come from the stars. There are new questions that ache with urgency. Why did it respond after generations of silence? What in our transmissions or activity triggered a reaction? Are there other worlds that have been visited and either welcomed or erased? How many times in history did such visits occur and leave only myths in their wake? And most immediate, what will 3I Atlas do when it reaches lunar distance on October 31st at 2317 UTC? We do not know if the approach is benevolent, neutral, or hostile. We do not know if this is first contact dressed in theater or a prelude to judgment. We do know one thing with terrible clarity. Our assumptions about the universe, about physics, about our place in the cosmic order are changing faster than we can adapt. The countdown continues. Each day brings new data, new signals, new adjustments by watchers far beyond our comprehension. The sky no longer feels like the same silent room. Now it feels like a doorway slowly opening toward a world we are not yet ready to meet. Mark your calendars. October 31st at 2317 UTC will not be just another night. It may be the first night humanity learns how small and how observed it truly is. Stay alert, keep your questions ready, and remember that when the unknown arrives, it will bring answers shaped by minds that built stars into tools. We have weeks, days, hours to prepare our response. What we choose to do with that time may define us forever.